talking about this week's topic. There's Condace.
Yeah.
Oh, we figured it out, Condace.
Here I am. Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, friends, this is one of my friends, Condace Presley. If you are in Atlanta, you know who Condace Presley is. She is a legend in radio and TV. And this week's topic, when I thought about which friend to have on for our Wednesday Wisdom with Friends, I immediately thought of Condace, because when we talk about diversity, first, I want to talk about when I first met you, Condace. Okay. It probably wasn't, it may have been one of our company conventions and gatherings, but I believe it was probably at NABJ. I remember I looked forward to meeting you every year at NABJ, which is National Association of Black Journalists. And you would be there representing radio, and I was there as news director for all the years. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But then when I moved back to Atlanta, Allie joined us, one of our coworkers. Hello, Allie.
Hi.
And then when I came back to Atlanta, Condace had moved from radio to TV, and she is the head of our community affairs department. And you all have to keep in mind, I came back in late 2019, and then we go into 2020, which was a crazy time. And Condace was such a partner for me and my learning, the station, and so many people nationwide, like across the country, and just so much good work. So for those of y'all who are joining us, the topic of the week is why diversity matters. And one of my big things is, and what I wrote about, is life lessons that I learned in newsroom that I wish I learned in church, that I believe we talk about in newsrooms more. And I think I want to start with, we mentioned National Association of Black Journalists. You were a former president, correct?
That is right.
Which I think sets the tone with just an awesome organization that is about making sure we have diversity at the table and diverse voices. So can you just explain to everyone, say hey and everything, but that can be our starting point, because that was my first eyes wide open in ABJ about how important of an organization and organized and influential organization it is.
Just to give you a real brief radio story about the history of the National Association of Black Journalists. 48 years ago this November, 44 Black journalists who had joined mainstream newsrooms as a result of the civil rights movement and all of the many civil rights stories that needed to be covered, they didn't have anybody in their newsrooms to talk to, but they always found themselves in the same place on the same stories, whether it was covering, anything that had to do with civil rights. And so these journalists decided that, well, we need a place to be able to have a conversation about what it means to be an African American in a majority newsroom. How do we tell the stories that we need to tell? And then how do we deal with some of our coworkers who might not be as comfortable with us being in the newsroom? That is how the National Association of Black Journalists came to be in December of 1975. Now, fast forward 48 years nearly, and we are still the largest organization of journalists of color in the world, especially here in the United States. And while some people who you meet of other cultures who will say, well, there's a National Association of Black journalists, does there need to be a National Association of White Journalists? Our answer to that question is always no, because even though that is the organization's name, everyone is invited to be a member. So you can't be an organization about diversity and inclusion and exclude people from membership. So that's how we came to be. We advocate for greater diversity and representation in newsrooms and always have. We also provide training for Black journalists at our conference that perhaps they may not be able to get just yet in the newsrooms where they are, in addition to a ton of other things, including our student projects, because we have a responsibility to we believe that we have a responsibility to bring up that next generation of journalists of color. And so through our student newspaper project, our student television project, our student radio project, our student digital project, we are, again, trying to keep people in the funnel so that when news directors and other content providers are looking for people to hire, we don't ever want anybody to say, I can't find anybody.
And that's why I've always gone as a news director who I recruit. And then it's awesome because they're the same, some of the same faces I've met like for the past 10 years. Just watching their careers and fostering them, and just seeing them grow. And to Condace's point, the learnings and the conferences, the things that are taught in ABJ, and then NABJ also joins every so many years with other similar organizations, and then those are like mega conferences.
That is correct. The very first mega conference we hosted was in Atlanta, where we are. It was called Unity, and it was in 1994, and it was about 11,000 journalists who came to our city that year, representing not only NABJ, but the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, the Asian American Journalists Association, and the Native American Journalists Association. And what we found collectively that we were able to do was to come together in presidential years, because one of the big draws to the meeting, beyond the family reunion aspect of it, of getting to see people that you only get to see once a year, was an opportunity to interview and talk with newsmakers and to make news during the conference. And so we did it in 94, in 99, and the last one we did, I believe, was in 08 in Chicago.
So one thing that I really, whenever I said that, I came back to Atlanta in 2019 and we went to 2020. And I remember when all this stuff in the world started happening, and I don't know if you remember this moment, Condace, but I had all these questions, and I was starting to see, like, I always considered myself a very open and welcoming person, but I was like, oh my gosh, I have all these blind spots too. And there were just questions that I had that I needed a safe space, or, to go to and just ask. And I remember you said, oh, I could be your diversity cultural partner. Which basically meant that you were a safe space where I could go ask questions. And you suggested some great books, for me to read, all of those kinds of things, which I also understand can also be an exhausting thing for people because then once you're the person that people come for questions, like everybody is coming with questions, and it can be annoying. Like, I get that. So my question for you, I guess, would be, first, how someone who has questions and may not have someone like you who's I didn't solicit it, you just put it out there. Where can someone go when they start realizing that, what, I don't have as many voices in my circle as I need to have? Where do you suggest that they go? Where's the starting point?
A lot of the starting points are places where you're very active. So perhaps it could be another person of faith. If it's someone in your church, if you're in a multicultural or diverse church, perhaps there's someone there whom you are comfortable with having a conversation with. Obviously, the workplace, that's your second family beyond your own family, where you want to start to have those types of conversations. And then look at your friend circle. And if there is a lack of diversity in a friend circle, the question, I think, is, well, why is that? And how can you put yourself in a place where there's an opportunity to develop a new relationship and to have those conversations, and define a cultural accountability partner, someone who will trust and take what you share and hold it with the responsibility that's required, and help you navigate, that journey of learning more and asking questions that you can think, oh my gosh, I'm never going to ask that. They'll think I'm just a total idiot. But you have to do that in order to learn and to grow.
Books you'd recommend?
Oh, wow. There are a lot of them. Obviously, we started with White Fragility is one.
Good one.
Abraham X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist is another. For people in any industry, and it's a really hard read, but it's a very important book. And that one is called The Color of Law. And it will show you how so many of the systems in our country and in business and in society were somewhat designed to leave certain groups at a bit of a disadvantage. Those are three that I would start with. The other one that I read, probably one of the best books I read last year, is called How the Story is how the story is told, or I have to turn around and find it, but it is, the author went to all of these very historic places, starting out at Monticello, and then went to the prison outside of New Orleans, and how the word is passed. And Clint Smith is the author, How the Word is Passed. And what he discovered was how different people tell these stories about these places that we may read about in our books or have been covered in the newspaper or on television, and the differences of how what we are told is passed along as an oral history. And the stories are very, very different. So there's a bunch to start with.
I heard a speaker recently who her whole thing is empowering women and people of color to write, because the narrative that is told and passed on is the narrative that was written down. And when women and people of color write down their stories too, that is passed down. You know, and that's where we are, and so many things is based on who were the people who were writing and getting things written down. In recent years, I guess a twofold question. This is probably a surprise one. It's a zinger. What are you most proud of as far as progress in recent years, and where do you still see room for people inviting other folks in?
Wow, that's not a difficult question there you pose, Suzanne. What am I most proud of? I'm proud that more people. I'm proud of the multicultural nature of our nation, and that while I grew up in a neighborhood of all Black families, today I live in a multicultural neighborhood. Even the neighborhood that I grew up in, where my mother still lives, which was once one of 2 all Black neighborhoods in our city, is now a multicultural neighborhood. So the fact that people can live wherever they can afford to live is progress. The challenge is too few people still have the means to live where they want to live, to have the quality of life that they would like to have. You know, so that's something that, and you see folks who are struggling, and it's easy to blame the victim, but if you know more about really some of the systemic issues that have challenged us as Americans, it's easier to understand why it is so hard for some communities to escape poverty, to find affordable housing, just to have enough, money to put food on the table. It's rough.
I think at the end of the day, that's my biggest lesson. It comes down to getting to know people. And when you get to know people and really get to know people, you understand more. And you understand more about who your neighbor really is, and loving your neighbor, which, I think it, again, goes down to, 2 greatest commandments: love God, love your neighbor. And who's my neighbor? Everybody's our neighbor. You got to get to know all your neighbors.
Yeah.
So,
doesn't the Bible say there's no greater sacrifice than and I'll misquote it, but that a man who will lay down his life for a friend.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. Exactly. So what would somebody who wants to, parting words for getting diversity matters, getting more seats at the table, what would you like to pass on?
If the one thing that I'd like to pass on is this myth that if there are more seats at the table, there's less, you're getting a smaller piece of the pie. That is not true. Another great book that explains this economically is called The Sum of Us. And it is a wonderful book that talks about that very thing. It's just, you're not shrinking the pie, you're actually expanding the pie. And the color really that matters in our communities has nothing to do with ethnicity. It has everything to do with opportunity for economic advancement. The color everybody seems to care about is green. And when there are more voices at the table, more opinions, more knowledge and information being shared, that's when we can collaborate, learn from each other's experience, because as you've written, Suzanne, you're listening to someone who sees the world through a different pair of lenses. It's amazing the things that we can do together. I'm still, even now, if I don't learn something new every day, and see, you've taught me now how to do Instagram Live, so I can check that box for today. It's a great thing. And it's really about just being your authentic self, having those conversations, not being afraid or fearing embarrassment to ask a question, because the reason why I think and I believe, especially, and this is something that I learned in my church, that people sometimes don't know one another or that they're afraid of one another is because they don't know enough about the other person. But once you have a conversation, you find out we're all the same. And once we get to heaven, I mean, we were all created in God's image, and we're all going to look like him. You won't look like you. I won't look like me. We'll look like him.
Awesome. Condace, thank you for your wise words as always. Thank you for everything, for what you do for our city, for our place of employment, and for me as a person. And for everyone else, you can always check Condace out, People to People, on Sundays. I think we put that online too. So even if you don't live in Atlanta, you can see it. It's a great community show, community-based show, and you tackle like some of the things that we talked about. Here in Atlanta, it's one of those important pieces of journalism that we do. I feel like I am a better person because of some of the conversations we've had, and I don't know if I've ever told you that. So my apologies for not telling you that before we were on an Instagram Live.
Thank you.
So with that, we've got some busy days ahead of us. So I'm going to go wrap some things at home, and I'll see you at work tomorrow. And everyone else, I'll see you back here tomorrow. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.